Star Wars The Force Awakens is the first official sequel to the original trilogy to release after 32 years, and just recently, the sequel to that was released in the long-awaited The Last Jedi. Is it another retread of The Empire Strikes Back, just like The Force Awakens was a retread of A New Hope? Well, kinda, but regardless, the question that is on all of our minds is it better than The Force Awakens? Well, in this video, we are gonna find out. Let the battle commence. Now, the story for The Force Awakens is that the new Empire, now called the First Order, has constructed a Death Star bigger than any other. The only hope for the Resistance is to find and locate the whereabouts of Luke Skywalker, who for some unknown reason has gone into hiding. But he has left behind a map which contains the location to his whereabouts, and a small piece has been discovered. The Resistance send their most experienced pilot, Poe Dameron, to retrieve it, but the First Order catches wind of this and send a battalion over to the same planet to obtain the piece of the map. Poe Dameron ultimately gets captured, but prior to this he gives the map to his droid BB-8 for safekeeping. The droid runs into a scavenger called Rey, and she agrees to take care of him until his master arrives. Meanwhile, Poe gets interrogated and unwillingly gives away the location of the map. Shortly after, he gets rescued by a stormtrooper called Finn, who refuses to kill for the First Order. They make their escape in a ship, but get shot and land on a desert planet called Jakku. Poe appears to be dead, even though we know he isn't, as there were distinct shots of him in the trailer which have yet to happen in the actual movie. Regardless, Finn runs into Rey and BB-8, and BB-8 here recognizes that Finn is wearing Poe's jacket. What follows is a friendly misunderstanding. After convincing the two that he tried to help Poe escape, Finn and Rey attempt to deliver the BB-8 droid along with the map to Luke Skywalker to the Resistance. And as the movie progresses, we get some rather cool and expanded plot points and character development. Moving on, the story for The Last Jedi is that the First Order is chasing the Resistance in space. Despite their efforts, whenever they try to leave the vicinity, the First Order seems to suspiciously keep catching up to them. So the Resistance continue to fly away until they realize that they are running dangerously low on fuel and won't be able to keep this cat and mouse chase going forever. Meanwhile, we see the continuation to Rey's first encounter with Luke Skywalker. He's reluctant at first, but after some coaxing, he decides to give her some basic training. And that's pretty much the setup for the story. We also have a subplot that involves Finn and Rosie, and later on we also discover more information regarding Luke's history with Kylo Ren and the events leading up to his turn to the dark side. Now, the story in The Force Awakens is overly familiar to say the least, and I can perfectly understand why this would be a big turn-off for many people. It pretty much follows the same blueprints as A New Hope with just a few differences thrown in. But the reason this doesn't bother me is because the foundation is very much the same, but the execution was different enough. Plus, what really caught my attention was that it sets up a ton of interesting new questions that will be answered in the inevitable sequels. So as someone who didn't mind the similarities, what mattered to me is where the story went from here. If it goes new places and succeeds in doing so, it will take this familiar setup in a different direction. If it doesn't, then it will make the setup look worse. And this moves us into the story for The Last Jedi. Now, as you most probably have already heard, The Last Jedi has narrative problems up the ass. The most famous one is the casino subplot involving Finn and Rose. As I mentioned in my recent top 10 video, it was pointless and a complete departure and distraction from the main story, and excluding it would have actually rectified pretty much all the narrative and pacing issues. Also, the time spent on this part of the story could have been put to much better use, such as further developing Snoke and his relationship with Kylo Ren. This would give us the much needed development that we wanted with Snoke, and it would also serve as a great lead up to Kylo Ren's eventual betrayal. At least this way there is story building and character development that is dictating Kylo's later actions, as opposed to something super quick and sporadic. Another problem in relation to the story was with a new character called Admiral Holdo. Her decision making and lack of communication with the crew, particularly with Poe, made no logical sense and caused a severe divide between them. Additionally, her lack of basic communication skills felt like it was only there as a means to keep the plot's resolution a secret from us, the audience. And that resulted in her sucking at her job. Whoever was involved in electing her as a replacement for Leia is a bloody idiot. And of course, the absolutely rubbish answer regarding Rey's lineage. Now, the director, Rian Johnson, said the reason he decided to go with the resolution that her parents are nobodies is that the best thing for Rey was to get an answer that she and us, the audience, didn't expect. Now, something I realized shortly after publishing my previous top 10 video is that didn't Rey already experience an answer that she didn't want to hear? I'm of course referring to this scene in The Force Awakens.
Whomever you're waiting for on Jakku, they're never coming back.
You see that? Everything Rian Johnson said that he wanted her to experience, she already has experienced in this moment. So making her experience that again is just pointless. What should have happened is that we see her uncover more information and answers about her parents, as this is the natural progression the story needed to go, and it would have further developed her character and opened up more doors to the realm of possibilities. Just closing all those doors and then reopening the same one and saying this is developing her character is just nonsense, and again, a missed opportunity. Now there are story elements that this movie did well. For example, Rey goes to train with Luke and all their scenes are really good. The dialogue they share, the training they do, the constant tension that builds, it's all great stuff. But when you get down to it, what did she accomplish from this journey? Luke didn't even train her to do anything. He didn't initiate any force training, lightsaber combat, or any other practical sets of training that she would need. Essentially, all he did was tell her to go here, but don't go there. Even the lightsaber she seemed to quickly teach herself, and as for the force, well, she seemed to pick that up by herself too. So if she's that skilled, then why did she even need Luke to train her in the first place? I mean, logic dictates that she does, but this movie throws that right out of the window. Now for all intensive purposes, the movie does have strong writing too. The best of it comes from the scenes involving Luke, Rey, Kylo Ren, and even Snoke. The scenes between these characters are the saving grace of this movie, and I would dare say that I was more entertained by them than the action scenes. But with regards to the overall story for The Last Jedi, I can keep going on and on about all the stuff it does wrong. The amount of stuff that was set up in The Force Awakens that were either ignored, done a disservice, or completely dropped is just mind-bogglingly frustrating. Now, whether you liked those plot points or not in the first place is irrelevant. They were established and now they need to be followed up and addressed, but this movie arrogantly, incompetently, and lazily handles, alters, and dismisses them. So the movie with the far superior story is The Force Awakens. The foundation it set up deserved a lot better. Now as far as new characters go, specifically Rey, Finn and Poe, I think The Force Awakens did a fantastic job with them. It's not easy for an established franchise to introduce new characters and tell you, these are your new characters for the next 3 films, but The Force Awakens incorporated a good amount of mystery and made Rey, to me, an interesting main protagonist, and her interaction with Finn, BB-8 and the rest of the cast was well executed. Now many people's complaint with Rey is that she is a Mary Sue. I never quite went that far, I always described her as overpowered. Now that is a problem when it comes to her overly efficient use of the Force, but I was willing to give it leeway in The Force Awakens because I thought an ingeniously plausible answer regarding her lineage would fix pretty much everything. But unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, we were given an answer in The Last Jedi and it was a bloody embarrassment. It did not only cement Rey as being even I'm gonna say it, a Mary Sue, but it also took away all the plausible developments for her character. No one can be this efficient with the Force in as little as a week, unless you want to delve into midichlorians, but seeing as these movies have been going off of the aesthetics and lore from the original trilogy, I seriously doubt that was their intentions. Now smaller things such as how Rey is able to pilot the Millennium Falcon despite never having flown one before doesn't really bother me because stuff like that is just a convenience to push the plot forward. This is a common thing that happens in movies, and a prime example is in A New Hope. Towards the end of the movie, Luke piloted an X-Wing despite never having piloted one before, and he actually managed to survive till the very end, whereas several other more experienced pilots died. And this is before he was even using the Force, so it really depends on your tolerance level, but this is something that really didn't damage my overall outlook on the movie and her character. Moving on, what I liked about the other new characters such as Finn and Poe is that they were given great introductions in The Force Awakens and were shaping up to be great characters with plenty of potential to have their own individual arcs as this new trilogy went on, but they were shamelessly sidelined in The Last Jedi. Not only did these originally fun and involved characters become uninteresting, but they were pretty much disgraced as well, particularly Poe. Now let's talk about Kylo Ren. Now I am aware that there are a lot of complaints with his character, particularly with his temper tantrums. The thing is though, not all villains are going to be suave, cunning and super composed. Some of them are going to be bad and will struggle to be efficient at it. Some people will go through personal issues and as humans do, will alternate through a plethora of different emotions. Kylo Ren is a very different villain in this regard and that's what I like about him. He was established as a conflicted character and to see him reach a unique breaking point in both movies was very interesting to me. It is especially interesting in The Last Jedi as he is going through some form of identity crisis and you can clearly tell that he is no longer satisfied with the position he's in. When you look at his character from the beginning and end of the movie, there is a progression, and as The Last Jedi came to a close, he became even more of a compelling bad guy and you could take him even more seriously than in the previous film. Or at least I could. Does it mean he's scary? Hell no, but it makes him different, more on the emotionally complex side of the spectrum, and so far, I am okay with the decisions they have made with his character. Now in The Last Jedi, some characters definitely lacked proper development and screen time. I can barely even remember some of the conversations or moments the characters had with each other that weren't exposition based. Again, The Force Awakens dished out exposition, but it also had plenty of natural character moments too, and as well as giving the movie time to breathe, it would still keep this constant energy going so the film would never feel like it's slowing down or having a dull and lifeless moment. That kind of craft is not present in The Last Jedi. In The Force Awakens, the character interactions and arcs with everyone felt natural and organic, as did the jokes. They were surprisingly plentiful, well written, and they were incorporated at just the right moments. Both times I watched it in the theatre, the audience always laughed, as did the people who I watched it with when it released on DVD, but that wasn't the case for the majority of the jokes in The Last Jedi. Most of the time they felt cheap, scripted, unnatural, and very reminiscent to the Marvel Cinematic Universe's humour, and that was not a good fit for a Star Wars movie. Now there were some good jokes, and the best of them easily came from Mark Hamill as Luke, but the rest just came off as table scraps. And then we get some additional characters such as Benicio del Toro, but the main one that has been added to the roster is Rose, and she is as completely pointless and unnecessary a character as you can get. This honestly feels like Disney's way of saying, look, multiculturalism in a Star Wars movie, isn't that good of us? Now pat us on the back. No, seriously, pat us on the back. Do it! Now yes, casting people of different ethnic groups is a good thing, and I am not denouncing that. But you have to make the character relevant. Rose just stands out as a sore thumb, and honestly, every time she was on screen, I was bored out of my mind. She served no purpose, had pretentious dialogue, had absolutely zero relevance, and they could have easily written her out. Honestly, to me, it felt like the only reason they included her in this movie is that they wanted to make her a love interest for Finn. And when you compare the adventure that Finn has with Rose to the one that he had with Rey in The Force Awakens, the chemistry he developed with Rey was far stronger, and in comparison, this one felt 100% inferior. And as a result, this type of character development feels like wasted time because it doesn't allow Finn to develop as much as he could have, because ultimately, she is just holding him back and making him go on the same arc he did in the last movie. And what really bothers me about this is that his journey in this movie could have actually been interesting, something that would have really elevated his character, but instead, it just felt like filler from a really bad episode of a TV show. And then we have Captain Phasma, who is just as useless in The Last Jedi as she was in The Force Awakens. Disney really shot themselves in the foot with this character. What was the point of publicizing her to such a ridiculous degree in interviews and press conferences? It fooled us into thinking that she was going to play a bigger part in these two movies than she actually does, and it gave us these expectations for her which we otherwise wouldn't have had. It's bloody ridiculous. Now, let's talk about the original cast. Now, Harrison Ford has his own charm which he used to inject into his roles, and I was expecting his reenactment of an older Han Solo to be just grumpy Harrison Ford, but thankfully, grumpy Harrison doesn't act so grumpy in this movie. Well, okay, he does a little bit, but it comes across as a natural progression of age. Also, his only child has turned to the dark side. You would kind of expect him to stiffen up a little bit. Now, there's all this talk that Carrie Fisher is so great in The Last Jedi, and I personally don't share that opinion. I personally think acting-wise, she seems on par with her performance in The Force Awakens. Her involvement in both movies isn't really that significant, but she pulls off acting like an older version of her character, and that's really all I have to say about her. The movies just didn't give her enough to do, and that's my biggest complaint with her inclusion. Now, Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker was fantastic, and this is especially commendable when you take into account that we haven't seen Mark Hamill act in a mainstream movie like this in a really long time. We've seen him wonderfully play the Trickster on The Flash and do exceptional voice acting for the Joker, but we haven't seen him do this deep level of acting before. But he absolutely knocked it out of the park, and I have absolutely no problems with his performance. It was a perfect 10 out of 10. Now, his character's actions, on the other hand, is another thing altogether. If you want more details on that, then I suggest you watch my top 10 problems with The Last Jedi, as I explain all of them in there. So, of the two films, which did a better job of portraying their characters? Well, again, that would be The Force Awakens. It introduced plenty of great characters, and it gave them an apt amount of development that you would expect from the first film of a trilogy. And the ones that didn't participate much were given great setups to contribute in the sequel, and The Last Jedi really didn't take advantage of any of them. Seriously, pretty much all of these characters feel like they had next to no additional development, and that is a gigantic waste. Also, I might as well quickly mention the Porgs. They were ugly, annoying, and pathetic. They are the very definition of product placement, so much so that they would fit in perfectly with the Emoji Movie. So yeah, the movie with the all-round better utilization and execution of its characters is The Force Awakens. The action in both of these movies is superb. We have countless other movies nowadays that try to either emulate or replicate the space battles from Star Wars, and even though they are entertaining, none of them manage to execute the charm that the Star Wars films used to bring to these scenes. But thankfully, both The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi deliver wonderful cinematography and choreographed action both in space and on the ground. Now that being said, they are not all perfect. In The Force Awakens, the lack of tension during the final fight sequence was my only real complaint. Unlike the rest of the action where it has you invested and at times on the edge of your seat, the flight sequence at the end was 100% predictable. Also, Poe was a good character, but at this point you don't care whether he dies or not, and there was no real sense of hopelessness even though they did try to incorporate it. As for my complaints with the action in The Last Jedi, well, do you remember when I said the movie has poor writing? Well, somehow, the poor writing actually makes its way into some of the action scenes, and this is the first for any Star Wars movie. And even the strategies of the fleets just didn't make sense a lot of times. There were plenty of points where I thought of a more effective course of action, and our heroes decided to do something more complicated and risky. Also, was it just me that noticed this? But the lightsaber sound effects were pretty weak in here. In The Force Awakens, whenever you see a lightsaber turn on or clash, the sound effects have this heavy weight and impact, and it comes across as this special luxury item whenever it's on screen. But in The Last Jedi, specifically with the blue one, it looks washed out, and the sound design was quite flat in comparison to The Force Awakens. Now, the climax battle in The Last Jedi was awesome. It was beautifully shot, had wonderful cinematography, magnificent music, the works. It was great. But unfortunately, the final fight between Luke and Kylo Ren ended up being just a few stylized swings of their lightsabers, and that's it. I mean, we spent an unneeded amount of time on pointless subplots, and they couldn't give us a proper and appropriately choreographed lightsaber duel. The most hurtful thing is that the movie expertly set it up, but ultimately, the two just stood around for ages, and the payoff was just a few swings. They could have easily made this a great lightsaber fight, but it just ends as soon as it starts. So even though The Last Jedi could have easily had better action scenes, the flawed script and questionable choices let it down. And therefore, the movie with the superior action is The Force Awakens. Now, I am aware that The Force Awakens copies a lot from A New Hope, and if you saw my review back when the movie came out, I said that was one of my complaints. However, the execution to me was so wonderfully constructed that I didn't care, and it made me feel happy both times I came out of the cinema. It filled me with a feeling of excitement, and part of that excitement was that I wanted to see what happened next. I had questions that I wanted answers to, and now that The Last Jedi is out, it has put a dampener on my excitement, as the questions I had didn't get any satisfying answers, and the stuff I felt I was promised weren't given to me. Look, at times The Last Jedi is great, but there are many other times where it flat out sucks. And Rian Johnson's reasoning for some of his decision making, particularly with Snoke's premature death, Luke's nonsensical death, and Rey's lineage, was absolutely horrendous writing, and it's because of that my score dropped even further after having given the movie more thought. Now, originality is something The Force Awakens didn't have, but I can tell you what it did have: respect. The movie had the heart and spirit of a Star Wars movie all the way down to its execution and the seeds it planted. The Last Jedi takes risks, some of which pay off and are interesting, but others that are not thought out and are executed in a completely disrespectful and non-caring fashion. Say what you will about The Force Awakens, but it had a structure. It left so many things open to the point that you could easily compile and plan out the possible events of the sequels yourself. The Last Jedi, however, is one big mess, and just thinking about it aggravates me. I should go away feeling optimistic and happy to watch it again and await its sequel, but so much of the interesting avenues these new movies could have delved into have now been closed off, and as a result, I have no interest in seeing where they go next. It's time for the scores. The Force Awakens, despite its problems, got a 10 out of 10 from me when it first came out, but after watching The Last Jedi, the score has gone down to a 9 out of 10, and The Last Jedi gets a 6. The Force Awakens felt like it was humbly passing the torch while simultaneously respecting the original characters. The Last Jedi feels like a corporate monster that is moving on to its next mascot, and consequentially that has had a detrimental impact on these new characters that I initially really liked, but now I feel have unfairly stolen the spotlight off of the original characters that made this franchise as good as it is in the first place. The Last Jedi also tries to advance the possibilities with the Force. Some of it is really good and makes sense, but others just come across as made-up fan fiction. In The Force Awakens, the Force was expanded upon and showcased new abilities, but they were more like expansions of what we had already seen before and was confirmed in mainstream Star Wars lore. The Last Jedi just decides to make alterations to the Force's rules rather than showing it evolve, and more often than not, this was my reaction throughout most of the movie.
That's not how the Force works.
The ending of The Force Awakens was great. The movie had planted plenty of intriguing questions and leaves you waiting in anticipation for them to get answered. On the other side of the spectrum, when The Last Jedi ends, it leaves you with no questions, all except one. What the hell is supposed to happen now? Seriously, other than the obvious, that being Rey versus Kylo and Luke possibly returning as a ghost, what are we supposed to be excited about? All Star Wars movies, including the prequels, ended in a place where it made sense, and whether you liked them or not, you really wanted to see what happens next. Well, The Last Jedi is the first Star Wars movie where I couldn't care less what happened next. Now bear in mind, I have so much more problems and logical errors with The Last Jedi, but I can't discuss all of them in this video. So if you want additional information, then you can check out my top 10 major problems with The Last Jedi. So with that said, we come to the end of the Versus video, guys. Thank you so much for watching, I really do appreciate it. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it as well so more people can be aware of the show. And I will see all of you next time. Take care.